Education K12. Govern. Education in the United States is a complex web of federal, state, and local involvement, each playing a crucial role in shaping policies and funding allocations. In this exploration, we delve into the intricate landscape of federal involvement in education, tracing its historical roots, examining key legislation, and unraveling the intricate balance between federal mandates and state autonomy. From funding mechanisms to legislative milestones, join us as we navigate the dynamic interplay between levels of government in shaping the educational landscape of the nation. Federal. The U.S. Constitution does not directly address education. The 10th Amendment states, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people." In plain terms, this amendment limits the federal government only to the powers provided by the Constitution and gives states, and thereby the people, the power to govern themselves. The real beauty of this amendment is that our founding fathers sought to ensure state autonomy. How does this work in education? First, the federal government passes legislation. In turn, the federal agency establishes regulations to implement the legislation, states determine their own laws and regulations, and, finally, local education agencies, school districts, establish policies to implement state laws and regulations. Legislation. Presently, the mission of the U.S. Department of Education is to promote educational excellence and equal access and provide a portion of monetary support to states. The U.S.'s very first piece of education legislation was the National Defense Education Act, NDEA, passed by Congress in 1958 to provide monetary support for schools to boost American competition with the Soviet Union in response to the Soviet launch of Sputnik. The next decade brought significant change to legislation addressing education in the U.S. and widely addressed equal access for all students. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 expressly provides protections against discrimination in public education on the basis of race. Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender, and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, specifically Section 504, expressly provides protections against discrimination against individuals with disabilities. Not only were these three pieces of legislation pivotal in providing protections against discrimination, but they also prohibit discrimination by recipients of federal funds. Quite simply, any state or local education agency that receives federal funds is prohibited from discriminating against students on the basis of race, sex, or disability. Additionally, the 1965 Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA, provides federal grants to improve the overall quality of elementary and secondary education. Title I of the ESEA is a program that provides federal aid to local education agencies and schools with high percentages of low-income children. The funds are intended to help schools with additional resources to provide all children meet state academic standards. In 2002, the No Child Left Behind Act, NCLB, updated the ESEA and increased school accountability to educate disadvantaged students to the federal government. The law required states to test all K12 students to indicate educational progress or lack thereof and linked federal funds based on test results. In 2015, the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, reauthorized the ESEA, replacing NCLB but maintaining the federal government's requirements for schools to continually work to improve educational outcomes for disadvantaged students. The improved ESSA offered new grants and funding for schools to provide more support to districts, schools, and resources for teachers to work towards the goal of a full educational opportunity for all students. Spending. Federal money flows to states primarily through grants designed to minimize funding gaps. These grants rely on formulas that consider the needs of each state, the average cost of education for students, and estimated poverty data from the census. For this reason, some states receive more than others. Alaska, Mississippi, South Dakota, and New Mexico all received at least 13% of their revenue from the federal government in 2019, while New Jersey, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York received less than 5% of their revenue from the federal government. According to recent data, of the roughly $771.1 billion in expenditures for public elementary and secondary schools during the 2019 to 2020 school year, only 8% came from the federal government. This includes contributions from the U.S. Department of Education and other federal agencies, including the Department of Health and Human Services, which runs the Head Start program, and the Department of Agriculture, which runs the school lunch program. The majority of federal funding usually comes in the form of Title I funds, special education programs, and child nutrition programs. Another important source of federal funding is supplemental funds for K12 schools to educate children with disabilities. The Individuals with Disabilities Act, specifically Part B, stipulates the U.S. government will assist states in the endeavor to provide special education and related services to ensure children with disabilities receive a free and appropriate public education, also called FAPE. In the 2020 to 2021 school year, the U.S. provided $11.6 billion to states for the purpose of educating 7.2 million, 15% of the total, children enrolled in special education. The majority of the responsibility falls to the states, as outlined above. State and local. The Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment requires states to provide each child equal access to public education. Children are assigned to the nearest public schools based on where they live, also known as zoning. There are just under 50 million students attending 91,328 public schools in 13,452 school districts in the U.S. See a full list here. At the local level, school districts are governed by multiple member boards that oversee school district policies, finances, superintendents, and collective bargaining agreements with teachers and other staff. At the state level, each state has a department or agency that oversees elementary and secondary public education. An elected or appointed state executive, usually referred to as the superintendent of schools or chief school administrator, heads the department. At both the state and local levels, school board members are either elected or appointed by mayors or governors. School boards share authority with local government or state departments of education. See the Policy Circle's Understanding School Boards Engagement Guide for more on this topic. State legislators set state budgets and use funding formulas to determine how much each school district will receive from the state. Each state's funding formula is meant to diminish somewhat the high degree of inequality in revenues per pupil that would result if funding were based only on local taxable resources and the willingness of local citizens to tax themselves, and thus provide at least some limited degree of equalization of spending and resources for all districts across the state. The state applies funding towards operations, e.g. salaries and benefits for teaching, guidance counseling, materials like textbooks, transportation, and facilities like libraries, as well as maintenance and construction of public schools. State and local funding are almost equal to a national average, with state governments providing around 47% of revenue and local governments providing about 45%. But individual state shares vary widely. Hawaii has no local educational agencies, so almost 90% of funding comes from the state. On the other hand, the District of Columbia has no state government, so almost 90% of its revenue comes from local sources. You can see your state's distribution in this Congressional Research Service report, last updated 2019. Revenues are raised mainly from taxes. State revenues mostly come from income and sales taxes, while property taxes generate local revenue. In examining the complex interplay between federal, state, and local governments in shaping U.S. education, it's evident that a delicate balance is required. The constitutional emphasis on state autonomy is a foundational principle, acknowledging the diverse needs and contexts of different regions. Federal legislation, starting with the National Defense Education Act, has played a vital role in addressing inequalities and ensuring equal access. While federal funding is crucial, contributing to just 8% of total expenditures, it's clear that the bulk of financial responsibility lies with state and local governments. This decentralized approach allows for tailored solutions but also raises concerns about funding disparities and resource inequalities among school districts. Legislation such as the Civil Rights Act and IDEA reflects a commitment to inclusivity and equal opportunities for all students. The evolution from NCLB to ESSA demonstrates an ongoing effort to strike a balance between federal oversight and flexibility for local innovation. In essence, the intricacies of education governance in the U.S. underscore the need for continuous dialogue, adaptability, and a collective commitment to providing a high-quality, equitable education for every student, regardless of their background or location. As we navigate these complexities, it's crucial to keep the focus on fostering an education system that prepares students for the challenges of the 21st century and promotes a lifelong love of learning. Thanks for watching, and please leave a comment.